Over the coming weeks, we're going to be studying one of the most famous stories in the Bible. We'll be taking our time and dissecting it very, very carefully and looking at a variety of parts and expanding on the themes of the particular study that Jesus provided in the long ago. If we pay very close attention, it'll cause us to feel a wide range of emotions as we trace the plot and the characters in the story. In the end, we're going to thrill at a happy ending, but we also will be very much aware of the scars that were developed throughout the period of time of the story, and be aware of how close it was to not being a happy ending at all. It's hoped that we can all see ourselves in the story, for I believe that was indeed the purpose of our Lord Jesus when He taught this. So we open this morning the story of the prodigal son and his amazing, loving Father. The story is the third parable in a trilogy of teaching that Jesus used in order to answer criticism of Him, that He was spending time with sinners. And it's found in Luke chapter 15. By the way, aren't we glad Jesus likes to spend time with sinners? Where would we be without someone such as He? So when we think about this story and we think about the obvious failings of the younger son, and eventually, many weeks from now, the failings of the older brother, when we find ourselves in that discussion, we come away saying, thanks to God, that wherever we are and whatever we are, He loves me. And He's providing for me access and opportunity that I do not have the right to have. And yet, with great gratitude, we should seize it. The lost coin, the lost sheep, and the lost son all point with slightly different emphasis to the centerpiece of the gospel or good news story: God's love for all and His commitment to our salvation. Luke 15, beginning in verse 11. Then he said, a certain man had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the portion of goods that falls to me. So he divided to them his livelihood. And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together, journeyed to a far country, and there wasted his possessions with prodigal or riotous living. And when he had spent all, there arose a famine in the land, and he began to be in want, and he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into his fields to feed swine. And he would have gladly filled his stomach with the pods that the swine ate, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have bread enough and to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. And he arose and came to his father, but when he was still a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion, and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and in your sight. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, bring out the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet, and bring the fatted calf here and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to be merry. Today I want us to begin where the story does, and that's with the demand of this younger son. The young son comes to his father, "Father, give me the portion of goods that falls to me." And so he divided to them his livelihood. Now, I'm going to be expanding on this beyond what possibly might be indicated. Going to be looking at what may well be, but I want to highlight that. These are conclusions I'm drawing. When we see the ultimate destination of the young man, there seems to definitely be attitudinal problems even here that certainly develop and fester over time to a point that we read the desperateness that we find in his ultimate circumstances. But it seems to me as I read this, there seems to be, firstly, some disregard for this young man's inheritance. Seems to me there's some disregard for it. Clearly on the mind of many people today is the uncertainty of their financial future. Sometimes we face reversals because of job losses. Sometimes we suffer at the reckless hands of those who were trusted. However, in this story, financial uncertainty does not seem to be a concern or a problem. They're a family of some means. They have servants, they have livestock, they have property. So when the young man is asking the question here to go ahead and divide to me, I want what's mine. It doesn't seem that he's asking something that could not be given because there seems to be an adequate amount. There is an estate of some size that the father possesses. When I think about the younger son, and then later we'll study the older son, you think about the question, where do you sit in your family? Now, by the way, this is not teaching the doctrine of all younger children are reprobates. And that's spoken from the older son in the family. I sometimes wonder about the younger, but anyway, somebody will tell on me today to Susan on Facebook before the day's over. That's not what the lesson's teaching. It's not teaching there's anything innately wrong with being the youngest or in being the oldest that we'll read about later on. But you know, where you fall in your family, you look at the family differently, I'm convinced. Are you a middle child? Are you the oldest child? Are you the youngest child? To some degree, while your parents have always tried very hard to treat everybody equally, your parents are also different depending on when they're having their children. Right? You know, there's even commercials you'll see from time to time where that first child, you know, I think it's an insurance company, but that first child, you know, let's be careful. By the third child, you're tossing them everywhere. I mean, you know, just, you know. We've got this down now. And maybe, hopefully, spiritually, the rules don't change any. But I promise you, and you don't have to indicate this if you felt this way, but have you felt that the rules for you as you sit in the family are different than maybe someone else in the family? Well, maybe it's a little different. Your parents are older, more mature. They might have loosened a little, but they also may have tightened a little. And depending upon how one or two before you have done, they may be having the particular resolution, say, okay, with this one, hammer's coming down on this one. So, things change. Things happen. We just acknowledge that it's different sometimes. I just think of those things when I think about the younger and the older. It could be that since this was the youngest son, and this is only a could be, that he didn't like how he fared in the pecking order of things. Under Old Testament law, the firstborn was to receive a double portion of the family's possessions, Deuteronomy 21, verses 15 to 17. This kept the greater portion of a family's wealth intact from generation to generation. Well, that may not have felt real good to this younger man. But it does seem that maybe he had no appreciation possibly to the family legacy. It seems that he lacked some patience, lacked some diligence. Eventually he would get what was his. I want it now. He maybe was one of the gimme boys. Gimme, gimme, gimme. Young people, it's possible that we see our parents as nothing more than a dispenser of what we want. Let me just talk to you young people for a minute. Young people, young adults, whoever you may be. It is really important in your life, and this will be manifested in a number of different ways, that you do not develop an attitude of entitlement. Now, I got to tell you, I speak from someone who didn't always appreciate that. I took for granted there'd be food on the table. I took for granted I'd have clothes to wear. I took for granted I would have everything that I needed. I took for granted there'd be a car for me to drive eventually. All right, it was a 64 Dodge Dart. Okay, but anyway, it was a car. I took for granted a lot of things, and as I've gotten older, I look back, and in later days, I actually went back and thanked Mom and Dad because time and perspective had caused me to become more grateful than I was at the time. Now, you'll be ahead of me if you do that now. That you'll have that kind of gratitude now and appreciation now. Your parents don't owe you. And if you want to have an awesome home life, show gratitude to your mom and dad. I promise you, they will take note of that. And they might even work harder for you if you're genuinely thankful for what they're giving you. The text doesn't use our contemporary word spoiled, but I grew up with that word. That seems to be the word that comes to my mind, at least, when I think about this young man. It's important that we be people of industry, people of work, people of initiative, people of accomplishment. And yes, we mature at different points in our lives. But there should always be a desire on our part to be people who are in the production of things, rather in the reduction of things. To be people who are producing rather than people who are consuming. And certainly in a family aspect, there's a lot of application that can be found there. Proverbs 18:9, he who is slothful in his work is a brother to him who's a great destroyer. When I read this, and again, I'm expanding the story, I see almost dishonor for the father. I know I can prove that to some degree because he goes and wastes everything the Father gave him eventually. We'll talk about that in some detail. He wanted what he wanted it when he wanted it, and he seemed unconcerned with maybe how that even impacted the rest of the family. Deuteronomy 5:16 says, "Honor your father and your mother as the Lord your God has commanded you, that your days may be long, that it may be well with you in the land which the Lord your God has given you." It's hard for me at least to imagine how this young man's behavior honored the precepts of that particular text. One of the greatest measurements of any society is how parents and grandparents are treated. It's one of the greatest measurements of any society. So all of us have opportunity, if you still have such to do, then take advantage of that moment that you still have to provide honor, appreciation, gratitude, assistance, whatever it might be. Because it's a very special thing to have gratitude that motivates us. Ephesians 6:1, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord." And I love how that text, that verse ends. Obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. And that's kind of blunt. Obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. It's the right thing. But there's something else that takes place here. And that is that the goods in the family are divided. Our minds might go to the text if we expand it on out and we think about how there may be application for thinking about a family literally existing as this one is that Jesus is depicting. The father grants the request made by the younger son. We may ask, I wonder why? Why didn't he just tell him no and take him to the woodshed? Why did he consent to this? Parents, I think you'll back me up in this. There comes a time in life when the young man or the young woman becomes a man or a woman. It's time to test their mettle, to determine what kind of engine's under that hood. And as I've talked to so many over the years, parents, that's got to be one of the hardest moments for you as a parent. To allow that child to get out there on that tightrope. No longer is there quite the safety net that there was when they were at home, and now they're out there in the world, making their way, making their choices. But you know, that has to happen eventually. I don't know. We're not told in the story. But it does seem to be one of those times. It seems also he had already left home in spirit. He was on his way. He's not sure where, but he just knows he's on his way. Selfishness frequently leads to separation. Sometimes the old adage applies, I didn't know what I had until I lost it. Anybody ever be able to make that application in their life? Now that is exactly what the young man is going to finally come to grips with in that far country. Memory of home starts coming back, and he goes, ooh, I'm looking at that in a whole different way than I was before. Matthew 5:5 said, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." When we think about meekness, that's not one of the top attributes that people typically seek to aspire to. What do you want to be in life? I want to be meek. Unfortunately, we take the M of that word and we turn it upside down and we see meekness as weakness. when indeed those people in Scripture who are called meek are the strongest leaders in the history of the world. The proud and the haughty person is someone God can't use. James 4:6 reminds us that God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Literally, God opposes the proud person. There seems to be maybe in this young man, again to me, a sense of pride as he is heading off. Proverbs 26:12 says, "Do you see a man wise in his own eyes? There's more hope for a fool than for him." That proper reflection on who we are and what we need will hopefully keep us from taking the journey of the young man. And we will appreciate the blessings that we have. We will seek even to share those blessings with other people. And we'll be especially grateful and express that gratitude to those around us who have blessed us, and especially back to the Father in heaven for having given us all good things to enjoy. In the weeks ahead, this young man will face the reality of that cogent fact about what it is to be foolish, to make foolish decisions, and to face one's foolishness. Maybe you today need to face foolishness in your life. Well, you know one of the hardest things in the world to do? It may be the hardest thing. I'm wrong. I have messed up. I have sinned. However you want to describe the term, we don't like to own our messes. We don't. It's hard. It's difficult. It's challenging. But as we'll notice in the lessons to come, and until the young man wrestled with what he had done, he remained in that far country separated from his father. Maybe today you need to come home. Maybe there's something in your life as a child of God that whether you share with us or not, or simply say, I just need the prayers of the congregation on my behalf, we'll be happy to pray for you. God knows the specifics of your situation. Or if we can help in a specific way, we want to do that. Or if you want to become a child of God today through responsive faith, to put Christ on today as a result of that faith in baptism, let us help you in that. As we study this young man in the weeks to come, I think every single one of us will see at least a little of ourselves in him. May we have the courage to admit it as we stand and sing.